Starting the recording. We're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone to Ballot 101, Voting in Tennessee. We are joined by the wonderful Stephen Adelson from CivicTN, they, he pronouns. So I'm going to read a little bio moment and then we'll get started. So Stephen is the program director at CivicTN. And at CivicTN, Stephen supports over 40 coalition partners to develop and implement their civic and voter engagement strategies to reach and empower millions of Tennessee voters who have been historically disenfranchised. Prior to joining CivicTN, Stephen was the National Manager of Redistricting Fellows at Fair Election Center's Campus Vote Project, and the founder and inaugural director of the Center for Civic Justice at Stony Brook University. Stephen has worked closely with partner orgs at local, state, and national levels to strategically increase capacity for long-term voter engagement efforts. Beyond their civic work, Stephen loves living life with his wife, Debbie, the outdoors, and traveling, photography, and cooking, and watching every Marvel movie at least 5 times in theaters. Stephen also volunteers as president of a nonprofit organization in Greece serving unaccompanied refugee youth from the Middle East and North Africa. So thank you so much for joining, Stephen. We're so happy to have you. Yeah.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited for our conversation today.
Yay. And I'm Natalie Schilling. I'm the Policy and Advocacy Associate at Awake, recently got hired for full-time. And yeah, I'm also just super excited to be here. So we are going to go ahead and get started. So I'm going to share the presentation and use that Q&A function if you have any questions or just like reactions, comments. I think you can chat to everyone. So we are going to go ahead and get started. So this is Ballot 101, Voting in Tennessee, kind of an overview. I'm going to go over kind of the nitty gritty of how to vote in Tennessee, whether that's absentee, in person, by mail, early voting, all that fun stuff. I'm just kind of going over tips and tricks and just generally how does voting in Tennessee even work, because we have some strict voter ID laws and some fun stuff we'll get into. Stephen's going to lead us through a conversation about barriers to voting and kind of the voter access landscape, thinking about redistricting and redlining, all this fun kind of stuff. So that's kind of where we're going to lead, and then just closing out with some voter guides that you can check out and just ways to get more involved in some key dates. So let's dive in. So we're going to go over some quick numbers of reasons why voting is pretty important. So while there are more than 4.5 million registered voters in Tennessee, only 31% voted in 2022. This is a statistic we quote quite often in the voting field, but Tennessee ranks 51st in voter turnout, which is pretty bad to say the least. And then due to a myriad of reasons, 1 in 5 Black Tennessee residents are barred from voting, primarily felony convictions disqualifying voters. So it's not great in terms of voter turnout and access in Tennessee. So we're going to get more into that. So just starting with some numbers. Okay, here we go. So the landscape of voter access. So we're just going to get into all those fun little topics. So voter registration. It is super important to register to vote at least 30 days before election day. Unlike some states, we don't have same-day voter registration. You must register in advance of 30 days. So luckily we do have online voter registration, which is a nice improvement and does increase voter access. So it's online. If you haven't registered to vote, please do. There's a quick link here. It's https, /ovr.govote.tn.gov. So that's a really great, it's pretty easy. I did it when I first registered and it was pretty quick. You can also, if you're not really tech savvy, don't really like online by mail, you can download and fill out the voter registration application form. And that needs to be mailed to your county election commission. So you can find that just looking up online, your county, and find the election commission and mail it to their address. Additionally, you can actually go in person if that's more your speed. You would pick up the voter registration application form at either your county election commission office, your county clerk's office, and register of deeds office. A lot of public libraries should also have that, and then state and local agencies are equipped with that voter registration form. You fill it out and turn it in at your local county election commission. So once again, all of this needs to have been turned in and mailed 30 days before the election day in order to be properly registered. And you can check if it was successful at that Go Vote TN. You can check the status of your voter registration to make sure it went through so that you can really ensure you're able to vote in the next election. So voter ID laws. So Tennessee is pretty strict when it comes to voter ID laws. You cannot use your college ID, which some states have and kind of makes it easier, but that is not the case for us. So everyone must bring a valid Tennessee driver's license or alternative photo ID with them to the polls. So alternative photo IDs might be like a US passport, military IDs. Actually, in Tennessee, you can bring your handgun carry permit with your photo if that suits you. So there's also an option to obtain a free photo ID to vote, but you would just need to go to the participating driver service centers across the state and get that free photo ID. There's still some hidden fees in that, so it's not really free, but it's less expensive than say getting a driver's license or something similar. So got to bring that voter ID with you to the polls. Super important. Okay. And if anybody has questions at any time, please throw them in the chat. So absentee voting. Absentee voting is tricky. I know personally when I tried to absentee vote back in Indiana, I got it sent back multiple times, even though I didn't think there were any errors. And so it can be tricky, but it's super important. So to absentee vote in Tennessee, you have to select a reason. So some examples: 60 years or older, you won't be in the county, you have jury duty, or any of these full-time student outside the county. So you just have to select one of those reasons. Okay, now requesting an absentee ballot. You don't get to request it until 90 days before the election, but you cannot request an absentee ballot later than 7 days before the election. So that should be requested as soon as possible. And we'll go over this several times, but everything, do it ASAP, because you want to have lots of buffer time because of all the different things that could go wrong or things that take a while. Sooner is better. So to get that absentee ballot, you need to fill out the absentee by mail ballot application. And I'm going to send this PowerPoint out to all of you, and all of this has links. So you'll be able to click that and it'll open the applications and stuff. So you need to fill that out and mail it or email it to your county election commission. Now, you have to mail your ballot in time. Once you get your ballot, you have to mail it in time for your county election commission to receive it no later than the close of polls on election day. So once you fill out that application and you get sent your ballot, it's best to just do it right then when you get your ballot, because it has to be received by close of polls. So if you fill it out on election day and send it, chances are it's not getting to the polls or to your commission by the end of the polls. So definitely best to get it done ASAP and sent. Also, if you hear snoring, sorry, my dog's asleep on my lap. So I'm not snoring, she is. All right. So yes, send it ASAP. And you can actually track the status of your ballot by entering your info into this link right here. And you can just copy and paste that link and check. So some best practices, I've kind of already said it, but it is recommended you mail your application in at least 10 days before the deadline to avoid any USPS delays. So once again, don't wait to the last minute because your ballot might not arrive in time and it will not count. So best practice, at least 10 days, ideally even sooner, so that you can make sure it's in and your vote counts. And then also just a best practice, double check your application form for errors and give it to someone else to look over so you can avoid the little back and forth. Hey, you had an error, refill it out, blah, blah, blah. I know my partner has had a fun back and forth with the Arkansas County Election Commission because she has like checked too many boxes or blah, 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 and had to back and forth it. So have your friend check over it, look over, and send that in because your absentee vote really matters. Yep, kind of went over this already, but don't wait till election day. And also be persistent and call your county election commission if there are delays or it doesn't seem like your ballot is being processed or anything. Call them, be persistent because your absentee vote matters. And it's really important that your vote counts. So be diligent. All right, polling locations. So there's a fun little thing about early voting that's a perk is that you can go to any early voting location in your county. So I always go to the Green Hills Library. That one's always just like quick, fast, and it's kind of convenient for me. So during early voting, you can go to any early voting location in your county. So if you need a list of those, I put the link right there. However, on election day, you must go to your assigned election day polling location. So you all have your chosen or your assigned election day polling location. So you've got to go to that on election day. And to find that, you can just type in your address to that link right there and it'll give you your polling location. You got to go to that on election day. If you try to go to one of the other ones, won't work. So that's important. And that's a perk of early voting and why we recommend early voting. You can pick your polling location. All right, early voting, and I already gave a little perk about it, but early voting period typically begins 20 days before an election and ends 5 days before the election. You do not need to provide a reason to vote early, so you just show up because you want to. And also early voting offers shorter lines and more opportunities to go vote that may fit better with your schedule. So you can go on your day off or whatever, rather than having to try to make it work on election day. And the short lines are a perk. I literally in and out in 5 minutes usually for me. So that's going to be early voting. So ballot structure. Kind of how the ballot structure works. And many of you, if you have voted before, kind of know this generally, but there are top of the ticket items, which are usually the biggest, most well-known races. So obviously November 5th, that's going to be the presidential election. That's going to be top of the ticket, the one most people are honestly showing up to go vote for. Or congressional races upcoming, those are going to be kind of top of the ticket items. So you'll see that, you'll typically recognize those names immediately. Then once you get lower and lower on the ticket, that's going to be more niche local elections. So you may start presidential, congressional, then you're going to get down to the nitty gritty of the state house, state senate. Then you're going to go even lower, say like your local school board or your local county, what say you? So that's kind of the general structure, and that's what you'll see on most ballots. And then in primary elections, you have to select Democrat or Republican primary ballots in Tennessee. So you can either pick, oh, I want to go in and select my Democratic primary people, or you pick the Republican. You can't get both. Unless, independent is a little bit separate, but select Democrat or Republican. And then in some states, not in Tennessee, but you can vote straight ticket. So you can just click your political party and vote for all the candidates of one party. That's not really how it works in Tennessee, but straight ticket is an option, but you can just go in and select all your Democratic nominees or your Republican nominees for yourself on there. So that's kind of ballot structure. And once you get into the election booth, you'll see it's pretty self-explanatory. I think just looking at the races, they try to make it simple. Your rights, super important. Employers must grant employees up to 3 hours of paid leave to vote when requested by the employee. So that actually, you got to request it by noon the day before election day to say, hey, I want to vote during this time on my work shift. They have to give it to you. So you have to go to the polls unless the polls are open 3 hours before or after your shift. So if you've got 3 hours before your shift that you could in theory, go to the polls, you would need to go then. But otherwise, you can get that paid leave. Your employer cannot be like, you can't get off to go vote. Like you're allowed to. And then if the polls close while you're still in line, stay in line. You can vote. So if they're like, okay, well, it's 8 p.m., polls are closed, and you've been waiting in line, you can vote. So just stay in that line, go vote. Additionally, if you make a mistake on your ballot, so if you meant to select one candidate but accidentally did the other, you can ask for a new one. So don't feel like, oh shoot, like I made a mistake. Now I guess I voted for that person. Like you get to ask for a new one. They'll get you a new ballot. It'll be fine. And all the poll workers I've experienced have been delightful and super helpful. So always ask for what you need. If the machines are down, so the little electronic, I guess, machines are down at your polling location, you can ask for a paper ballot, like a paper ballot. So don't just, oh man, the machine is down, I can't vote. Ask for that paper ballot because they'll have some on hand. Yep. So that's going to be all for my section. Do we have any questions in the chat so far? Okay, I don't see any. So we're going to move on to Stephen's portion for them to talk about some barriers.
Thank you so much, Natalie. That was a really great overview of what the elections and voting landscape in Tennessee looks like. Before I start talking about barriers to voting, there were a few things I wanted to highlight or uplift, and maybe a few other things to add. One, online voter registration in Tennessee is a great thing that we have, and we should take advantage of that whenever possible. In recent weeks, we have seen an uptick in people having issues with using online voter registration, particularly people who are newer citizens or who are part of immigrant communities in our state that are getting prompts after they fill out the online voter registration to say we couldn't verify your information or your signature doesn't match with what's on file for whatever reason may be. So if you come across anyone in your day-to-day that has an experience like that where they're struggling to register to vote online, please encourage them to still print out or get a paper copy of a voter registration form and fill it out that way. We're still trying to understand why those barriers are in place or those barriers are increasing. But for now, we really want to encourage people to still go through the registration process in whatever way is going to work for them. In terms of absentee voting, Natalie said it, and I want to emphasize it one more time. The fact that you have the option to email your absentee ballot request to your election commission, take advantage of that opportunity because the moment you sent that request to them, it's received. Unlike when you send it out in the mail, you are at the whims of how the United States Postal Service delivers mail. And if there is a delay, and there will likely be delays closer to the November 5th election, you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you can't vote absentee if you want to be able to use that option. So with that in mind, I encourage you to think about using the email option to request your absentee ballot. Also, having someone make sure that you filled out a form correctly is always a great thing to keep in mind, especially a friend or a family member, someone that you trust. As someone myself, who when I registered to vote for the first time when I was 18 years old and filled out the form wrong, I showed up to vote, waited 3 hours, and then got turned away. I had not the greatest first experience. And so that was some really good advice to add there. And then one final thing I wanted to highlight from Natalie's portion is about election day voting. So for most counties in Tennessee, you vote at your assigned polling place, unlike early voting where you can vote at any polling location in your county. There are a few counties in Tennessee that actually have election day voting that functions the same as early voting. So in counties like Wilson, and Rutherford, at the very least, there might be some others, but those three counties offer what are called vote centers. And so instead of being assigned to a particular location on election day, you can also still vote at any location, which is very convenient and it's awesome. Take advantage of it. And hopefully that will continue to expand across the state based on the success of that effort. With all of that said, let's talk about barriers to voting. As Natalie mentioned earlier, Tennessee has some challenges when it comes to voter registration and turnout. Some of it is structural and systemic. That there are realities that Tennessee is not the easiest state in which to enter our democratic process and actually be able to cast a ballot. We are not the friendliest state when it comes to that, but we can overcome that with the support of people, communities, and organizations. So you can see on the screen here, we are a state that denies the right to vote to more people with felony convictions than any other state other than Florida. And with that in mind, Florida has a much larger population than us. So that's not surprising. And also given their voting landscape, that's also unsurprising. At the same time, the fact that we are in this company is not something that we should be proud of. We deny the right to vote to about 1 in 10 people in Tennessee. And as Natalie mentioned earlier, that also includes 1 in 5 Black Tennesseans. That is not unintentional, that is by design. And we have a lot of work to do to overcome that. There are a lot of amazing people and organizations in the state of Tennessee that are working hard to try and ensure that people who are currently disenfranchised or who have lost their right to vote because of a felony conviction, that we can overcome some of those barriers going forward. So we can go ahead to the next slide. So in Tennessee, who doesn't have the right to vote? First and foremost being people who are not United States citizens. And also, if you are not a resident of Tennessee, you can't vote in Tennessee elections. And as we mentioned earlier, people with certain felony convictions might have lost their right to vote. This is a little bit complicated, so we're not putting all of the information on the screen. If you want to learn more, please go to the link that is provided. The reason why I say that is depending on the year when you were convicted of a certain felony, you might have lost your voting rights. Whereas in other years, if you were convicted of that same felony, you might not have lost your right to vote. It's very complicated. It has changed so much over the past several decades. And so if you or someone else is in that situation where you want to determine if you might have your right to vote still, or you might have lost your right to vote, to really look into the guidance that's available. So we go to the next slide. There are circumstances in which someone who has been disenfranchised or has lost their right to vote because of a felony conviction can get their voting rights back. There are certain felony convictions where if you're convicted and you're trying to and you're in Tennessee, unfortunately, you lose your right to vote for the rest of your life. There is a list of what those felony convictions are on the previous slide if you go to that link. But here, there are ways in which people with certain felony convictions can get their voting rights back. The hardest and most complicated way in which to do that is to get a pardon from the governor of Tennessee, the United States president, or someone else in the state where you were convicted of a felony, where they have the authority to pardon you for crimes that you have been convicted of. The other way in which you can go about getting your voting rights back, if you're eligible, is to get your full rights of citizenship restored. For a very, very long time, over the past year or so, it has not been understood what this means. It has also changed quite a bit because of a court ruling in Tennessee last year that was then interpreted by our state election division in certain ways that have made it harder for people to understand, one, what does it mean to get your citizenship rights back? And then two, what is the new process for doing so? We have a better sense of what that looks like. We are not going to explain it today. If there is someone who wants to go through that process, though, you should absolutely speak to a lawyer, someone who has the ability to help support you navigate that process. And there are a lot of amazing organizations that will also connect you with the right people to go through that process. In terms of getting your citizenship rights restored, there are a few other pieces that you also have to have satisfied. One is if you owe any court costs, fines, or fees, you'll have had to have paid all of those off to the courts themselves or to the quote unquote the victims of your conviction. At the same time, You also have to be up to date on your child support obligations if you want to be able to get your voting rights back in Tennessee. And if we go to the next slide, you will find out that Tennessee is the only state in the United States where if you lose your voting rights, you have to be up to date on your child support obligations if you want to get your voting rights back. That is one of the criteria. So if we go to the next slide, I think you clicked a link. So while we're getting back to the slides, and you can skip the child support one since I already talked about it. But in Tennessee, there are also some financial barriers, like I had already mentioned. In Tennessee, if you are convicted of a felony, you want to get your voting rights restored, there are circumstances in which you need to make sure all of your financial obligations are satisfied. And so you could see on the screen here that Tennessee is one of several states, particularly in the South or in the Deep South, that have made it explicitly required that certain financial obligations are satisfied before you can get your voting rights back. If we go to the next slide, we also have challenges in Tennessee when it comes to voter ID laws. So in the United States, there are millions, if not tens of millions of people who don't have a government issued photo ID. That could be for a variety of different reasons, but the most common reason why someone might not have a government issued photo ID is because it costs money to get a government issued photo ID, and not everybody can afford that. And unfortunately, as states implement voter ID laws, that is inherently disenfranchising more and more people. So you can see on the screen here, accessing a photo ID that you can use for voting purposes can be challenging for young people, older folks, people of color, people who are unhoused or homeless, and people with lower income. I do also want to emphasize that for young people in particular, or people who are attending college or higher education, in Tennessee, you can't use your college student ID for voting purposes. And for many students, that might be their only form of ID that has their photo on it and has their name on it. And in Tennessee, at the very least, you're not allowed to use that ID for voting purposes. There's been some efforts in the past by some folks to try and change that, but it hasn't happened. And unfortunately, so that means a student who only has that ID would still need to get a government issued ID, like a passport or a driver's license or a state ID in order to be able to vote. So that's a major barrier for people who were trying to welcome into the democratic process at the very beginning of their eligibility. So hopefully we can do something about that at some point. And we can go to the next slide. We talked about how in Tennessee, voter turnout's pretty low. And it's unfortunate. And like I said earlier, some of that is by design. There are people who have tried to keep others out of the process for a really long time and have done so successfully. And or many of us are working really hard to try and change that. At the same time, we might have quote unquote safe and secure elections, uh, but that also has resulted in really in making it really hard for us to actually participate in our elections as well in ways that are unnecessary to the actual integrity, safety, and security of our elections. So if you see here, we are ranked in Tennessee 48th in the country when it comes uh, to ease of participation in elections. And when we're by 48th, that means we're on the harder end. It's harder for us in Tennessee to participate in elections than in 47 other states, which is really, really unfortunate. And there are things that can be done to change that, and we have to continue to advocate for that to be the case. And we can go to the next slide. I encourage folks to ask any questions that they might have too, or if you want us to share some more thoughts on any of these barriers or anything else that we're sharing. When it comes to redistricting and gerrymandering, some people might not be familiar with these processes. They don't happen very often. They happen every 10 years, so it's not something that we're talking about all the time. But in our country, every 10 years, we complete the census. And the census data is then used to draw what our state legislative districts and congressional districts are going to look like for the next 10 years. In Tennessee, um, our legislative districts are, or these maps, so to speak, legislative district maps, are drawn by our elected officials, by our state legislators, and they can be approved or vetoed by the governor of our state. But we are in a state where this process is controlled by the people in power. And then in many cases, not just in Tennessee, this power is then used to benefit those who are in power further or to grow their power over time by drawing districts that are going to benefit them or benefit others that they would like to see have more power. That is called gerrymandering. When you are using the redistricting process or the process of drawing our legislative districts for the purposes of uh, keeping or growing your own power and also diluting the voices and the power of other people. We've seen quite a bit of that in Tennessee, and you'll see in a moment an example of that. There are requirements that our state lawmakers must meet in order for a map to be drawn. For example, a certain number of counties cannot be split up. The districts must be drawn in ways that, in terms of the shape, makes sense and doesn't look weird, so to speak. And you'll probably see some examples shortly of that still being the case, that it looks weird. And the primary objective is to keep communities together. So keeping counties together, keeping cities together, keeping communities where people are deeply connected with each other together and not splitting them apart between multiple districts. Those are the requirements at the state level. Those requirements don't apply at the congressional level, since that is a little bit of a different process that has different requirements. So if we go to the next slide, I guess I kind of talked about many of these things, but the reality is gerrymandering is the process of drawing maps to benefit one particular political party over another. Racial gerrymandering itself is how legislative districts are drawn to, again, dilute or mitigate the power that Black, brown, and other people of color have in our state. Some tactics include packing Black voters into a district so that they can elect a fewer number of representatives across the state, and then the same thing, cracking them, moving Black voters into multiple districts, making them a minority instead of a majority minority district. It's illegal to do this. It has happened in the past year alone in multiple states, including Alabama and Louisiana, where the United States Supreme Court ruled that those maps were drawn illegally, and those states were required to redraw their maps to ensure that our historically marginalized communities, including Black and brown folks, have the representation that they deserve based on the population that exists in their states and the communities that are present. So if we go to the next slide. Here is a great example of gerrymandering in Tennessee. This will also be the first presidential election in which these maps are used. And so for many people, this will be a new experience. If you see on the left side, this was the congressional map that was drawn back in 2011. So been quite a while. And that was the map of our congressional districts for about 10 years. And then on the right-hand side, you can see what is our new congressional district map as of 2021. There's at least one federal lawsuit alleging that in Middle Tennessee that this was considered racial gerrymandering. So if you look at the middle, you can very much tell that these congressional districts were drawn very weirdly and with very intentional purpose. They nowhere near represent what things were like 10 years ago. Our community makeups are not accurately reflected in this map. The one key thing that they did in this new congressional map is they split Nashville up into 3 congressional districts. That is not what it was like before. Nashville was previously contained in 1 congressional district. And even though it's supposed to be a priority to keep cities and counties together, the map was still drawn to split up a major city into 3. That is gerrymandering at its finest. And again, there is legal action that continues to be pending around this issue. So we can go to the next slide. There are many other barriers, and I know we're talking about a lot of barriers. At the same time, I really want to emphasize that despite these barriers, there are so many people who are doing such hard work to ensure that these are barriers that people don't experience every day when they're trying to vote and participate in our democracy. So I want to shout out everyone who is contributing to this movement that we are building, where everyone is able to thrive, live in their full dignity, have a voice and a say in the state of Tennessee, in their communities locally, so that we can ultimately elect leaders who align with all of our values, that will advocate for everyone, even those that they might not always agree with, but that will ensure that we're all able to feel safe, have access to the services that we need, and are able to, again, grow the lives that we want to be able to have. There are a couple other barriers I would just want to mention. One is closing and moving polling locations can cause a lot of confusion and can discourage voters. As a result of redistricting, that happened in 2021, most counties in Tennessee, at least bigger counties, might have moved around some polling locations. And that is generally the case. But at the same time, it creates some confusion. And when we redraw legislative districts through redistricting, people get put into different districts, which means their polling locations might also change. And as a result of that, we need to do the extra work of educating people and say, hey, this year you're actually going to be voting, you might be voting in a different location. And so take a quick moment, look up your address in the voter lookup system online through the Secretary of State's office, and just make sure you know where you're going to be voting this year, because that's really important. One other example I want to highlight is Memphis, Shelby County recently made a decision where all of the polling locations in the county that were at schools have been moved to non-school locations. So I just got a question in the chat of what an example of a non-school location change is. So again, in Memphis, Shelby County, all of the polling locations that were previously at schools have been moved to other locations like churches, libraries, community centers, and other places like that. Some of this has stemmed from changes in state law in response to gun violence in schools. And so Shelby County decided that they couldn't meet the safety and security obligations that they felt like were coming into place. And so they decided to move those locations. That affected this year over 100,000 voters in the county. And so the county had to notify all of these voters that their polling locations will have changed. Unfortunately, you're still going to have a lot of people who will show up to a location because that's where they've always voted. And so it puts extra work on people and organizations like ours to make sure that we are doing that extra voter education. So hopefully that answered that question. And again, that's the clearest example in just this year of changes like that that affected quite a number of voters. The final barrier I just want to highlight on here is that access to voting for people with disabilities can be a challenge at times. We have a couple of really amazing organizations in Tennessee, including the Tennessee Disability Coalition and Disability Rights Tennessee, that work very closely with county election commissions and also the State Division of Elections to ensure that we are providing fully accessible elections for people with disabilities. We still find that we have polling locations that are not physically accessible for people with certain physical disabilities. We run into circumstances where machines, go on the fritz, or we don't have enough accessible voting machines that are specifically designed for people with certain types of disabilities. At the same time, we have a lot of very rural communities where public transportation is not reliable to the degree that we would like it to be. And we are even in major populated areas of the state where we still don't have reliable public transportation. That creates a barrier for people who are trying to get to their assigned polling place or the closest place where they can go vote early. So there's a lot of different barriers. And for all of these barriers, there are things that we can be doing to help voters to overcome them and ensure that they have the best voting experience they possibly can. So if we go to the next slide, my final slide is to give a little bit of a preview of what folks can expect on the ballot in 2024. As many folks know, we have two more major elections happening this year in Tennessee. On August 1st, we will be having a federal and state primary, and we will also be having a state and county/local general election. So for the August election, we will have a primary for United States Senator, United States House of Representatives, Tennessee Senate in the even numbered districts. So if you're in an odd number district, you are not voting for your state senator this year. But then we will also be voting for state House of Representatives in all of our communities. For some counties, we might also be voting for Democratic and Republican state executive committee members. These are committees that exist in Tennessee that help promote either conservative or progressive values as a state. And so we'll be electing members of those committees as well, depending on what seats are open. And then in terms of the state and county general election, we have a lot of really important local races happening this year. So on August 1st, we'll be voting for a variety of judge positions, particularly circuit court judges. We'll be voting for our assessor of property, a really important position for our housing values and also our property values and how much we pay in taxes. We'll also be voting in some places, for highway supervisor or road superintendent, how we maintain our roads, build new roads, keep our communities connected with each other. We will also be voting in some communities for school board. How are we going to protect our public schools? How are we going to support our teachers and our children? That's on the ballot for a lot of communities on August 1st. And in some communities, we'll also be voting for city council or county commission members, seats that have opened up recently. And then in November, on November 5th, we'll be voting for president and vice president of the United States. We will be voting in the general election for United States Senator and United States House of Representatives. We'll also be voting in the general election in November for Tennessee state senators in our even numbered districts, and then all of our House of Representatives in Tennessee. So that will be our November election. Some of you might also have some other local races that pop up on your November 5th ballot. And that happens when a seat opens up and there's a vacancy. So keep an eye out for when those happen. There will be some other things on your ballot as well. You might have ballot initiatives or ordinance referendums. These are opportunities for you to have a say in local decisions. A really good example is that for Nashville in November, there will be an initiative on the ballot around transportation or our transit more broadly. And so voters will be able to have a say in the future of what public transportation looks like in Nashville. Those similar initiatives might pop up on your ballot. And if they do, we encourage you to really research and learn more about what those mean and then make an educated and informed decision. So I think I covered everything that I was going to cover. So Natalie, I'll hand it back over to you.
Amazing, Stephen. I learned so much, even though I helped with the slides, I still learned so much. So thank you so much. And Stephen is such an awesome person and resource. So if anyone has any further questions for both of us, but primarily Stephen, please send them an email or anything, because they're super knowledgeable. So I am gonna just briefly go over what issues are really on the ballot and what are really important issues in these debates and in these different candidacies. So something that was highly controversial last year was public school funding and vouchers. So that has become a super important issue in especially these upcoming primaries. Where does each candidate stand on public school funding? Additionally, reproductive rights have been super important after the fall of Dobbs and how Tennessee's lack of exceptions, what that means for folks. So reproductive rights are really important. You might see certain candidates that are really running on reproductive rights issues. So that's important to keep an eye out on. And then gun reform, of course, after the tragic Covenant shooting, gun reform has been a hot topic. And so a lot of candidates are really focusing on gun violence and gun reform, or the lack thereof, for their candidacy. Additionally, LGBTQ plus rights. As many of you know, Tennessee is not the most friendly to LGBTQ plus folks, and especially with the introduction of so many new laws and policies in the past year, anti-LGBTQ plus policies. This is really important for those marginalized folks in our communities. Additionally, criminal justice reform. That was a big one in this past year, 2 years, like bail reform and all these different building of more prisons versus less. So criminal justice reform is also super interesting to hear like candidates speak on. So I would just keep your eyes out. And when you're kind of going through and selecting your candidates, these might be things that folks have statements on, or you would want to ask your candidate, hey, what do you think about public school funding? Would you support vouchers? Blah, blah. So these are important. Of course, this isn't an exhaustive list. There's a million more things, the economy and all the things, transportation, all that. But these are kind of some key cornerstone issues that we are seeing in the upcoming elections. Okay, and then we're not going to go into each candidate and explaining them, because that would kind of verge on a C4 activity, which we can't do. So what we're going to do instead is direct you to some really awesome voter guides by our partners. So the Equity Alliance already has one out for the March 5th election. We're hoping to see the voter guide for the August one come out tomorrow, so I'll probably be sending that in the email. But if you're wanting to look at March, T already has their voter guide out, and these are clickable when I send the PowerPoint. Also, Tennessee Advocates for Planned Parenthood has their voter guide out, so you can see where each candidate stands on reproductive issues and who they are endorsing. And lastly, Vote 411 is a really great resource from the League of Women Voters that can give you a voter guide of what to look for. And you just type in your address into their website and it'll show all of the races and kind of give you a lowdown on things. So highly recommend checking out these nonpartisan voter guides to get some of your information for how you're going to vote. So you will be able to click on all of these, and we can also send some more as they come out, because I'm sure there will be more, but as of right now, these are kind of the main ones we've seen. Oh, why is that picture so blurry? Okay, well, you can also find this on the CivicTN Instagram, but some key election dates. Oh, it's clear now. Okay, some key election dates for Tennessee. If the voter registration deadline has already passed, so I really hope everyone's registered. Early voting is actually starting tomorrow, so that's super exciting. So make a plan to vote. Also, in terms of early voting, Awake and Planned Parenthood of Northern Mississippi and Tennessee are doing our phone banking on Saturday. So if you want to do that, please sign up. I'll send the registration link, but we're going to be phone banking, telling folks to early vote. So you have from the 12th through the 27th to vote early. And then the last day to request that absentee ballot is July 25th, but do it ASAP. And then, of course, election day, that's going to be August 1st. So it's going to be really awesome and super great. Stephen, if you want to plug some CivicTN election day fun stuff, there is about 1 million things that CivicTN is going to be doing on election day. Feel free to pop in.
And by million things, Natalie literally means probably a million things. So to highlight a few things, for those that would be interested in joining us on election day in one of 5 cities, we'll have what are called our election hubs, where we bring communities together and do a last big push to reach out to voters, help them to make their voices heard, answer any questions that they might have, help address any challenges that people might be facing on election day itself. So if you are in or nearby Chattanooga, Clarksville, Knoxville, Memphis, or Nashville, we would love to have you join us at one of our election hubs. There will be plenty of free food. It'll be a great time. We do this for every major election now, and so we'd love to have you there. If you can't join us in person for whatever reason may be, we will also have um, virtual phone banking and texting on election day. We have what are called our texting and phone banking power hours, where we get as many people on the same call as possible on Zoom to text over 100,000 voters and call thousands and thousands of voters just to make one big last push on election day. We also write a ton of postcards. We'll be starting to write postcards for the November election, so people will get those in their mailboxes with lots of important and helpful elections information, and also what to do if you run into an issue on election day and you need help from somebody. The final thing I'll highlight, and it's in the graphic that Natalie has on the screen, is we have a website called Proud Voter. So if you go to proudvoter.org, if you want easy access to all of the information about upcoming elections, if you want to be able to register to vote, update your voter information, find your polling place, learn about who and what's on the ballot, reach out to somebody if you have an issue with voting or if you have a question. Everything you can be found on our website, proudvoter.org. It went through a complete redesign earlier this year. It looks beautiful. And you can also learn more about all of the organizations across Tennessee that are working hard every day to make voting more accessible for every voter in our state. So I think that covers about everything that I could think of. And that was 1 million things. So Natalie,
Yes.
I'll hand it back over to you.
Awesome. And I'm going to send a follow-up email tomorrow morning, and I'll have Stephen send me all of that info for y'all to sign up with links and everything. So if you didn't catch all of that, that's okay. I will send it to you tomorrow. And
Natalie, can I highlight one more thing?
yeah, go ahead.
Because Nadira shared it in the Q&A, and I really want to highlight Organized Tennessee, a really amazing organization in our state that is focused on protecting and defending the right to vote in Tennessee. They manage what is called our poll observing program, where they train and credential people to be at polling locations on election day and during other times of the year, where we make sure that voting is going smoothly. And if voters are being turned away or are experiencing any issues, we can learn about them in real time and work with the people who have the power to do something about it to address those issues. So I want to give a shout out to Organized Tennessee. They are actively recruiting poll observers for the August 1st and November 5th elections. So if you are interested in helping to ensure that the smooth administration of our elections and supporting voters at the same time, this is a great opportunity to plug into. So hopefully we can share that out in the follow-up email as well.
Absolutely. Yes, that's such an important highlight. Poll observers are so important for us to know what's actually going on at our polls. And if there are issues systemically across multiple, we can identify them and advocate. Awake, we educate, advocate, change. So we'll learn, we'll advocate, we'll change it. So super, super grateful for Stephen for being here. It's been amazing. I hope y'all learned as much as I did. And do we have any last minute questions? We've got about 4 minutes. So we have 2 answers. So that's awesome. Poll observer. Okay. Well, if no one has any questions, I'll give a kind of last call and then you get 4 minutes back. So that's awesome. Thank you guys so much. And I'll be sending a follow-up email tomorrow. Feel free to send, I'm going to send a video of this training. Feel free to send it to your friends, anybody you feel like would benefit. So it's been awesome. If you want to donate to Awake, I'll send that, or Civic, whatever, just let us know. So thank you guys so much for being here. Have a great rest of your
Thank
day.
you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.